Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this new IEA Africa University. I'm very pleased to welcome you again for a new edition of this monthly webinars. Today, I will present to you a report we recently developed and released on the Western Sahel and how to accelerate clean energy transitions there. More on context to start with, for those who are not familiar, this first, who the IEA is. So we are an intergovernment institution. We are really at the heart of global energy dialogue, conveying energy ministers from all the world and discussing what is at the top of the agenda for energy transitions, energy future, looking at sustainability, looking at energy security, looking at all technologies, all fuels. And basically, we concretely do three things. We provide unbased data from all countries in the world and analyzing all the sectors. And this is thanks to all the work that you are doing in country with statistics teams and sharing those data and those statistics with us and with other organizations. B, we advise policymakers based on our analysis. And C, we support implementation with capacity reinforcement programs, for example. And today's activities happens under the framework of a program we have funded by the European Union, which is the capacity reinforcement program on statistics and modeling for 10 sub-Saharan African countries. And I see that most of you have already followed the first online course we have discussed. As travel restrictions will soon be released for us too, we aim in 2022 to start organizing face-to-face in-country activities, and we'll very soon come back to you on that. Okay, so today I will present to you some work we did on Sahel and that we released a month ago in Dakar in an hybrid format, where we had around the table the energy minister of Senegal, but also officials from the governments of Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad. This report really deals with how this Sahel region has evolved so far, and what are the perspective to 2030, having in mind the goal for universal access to electricity and to clean cooking, and other international goals. And the focus of the study was really much on identifying good practices that have been implemented in some countries and could be replicated in others to accelerate the uptake of clean energy transitions, to accelerate the uptake of energy access, renewable developments, reliability of energy services, etc. So I will enter slightly into the findings of the report. The main idea is that clean energy transitions can really boost Sahel development. So let's put a bit the Sahel in this context. So when we look at this region, which again we selected as being Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, we have a dynamic, young, increasingly urban population, and we also observe fast-growing economical trends. Yet the region has been facing certain obstacles that really challenge the country's objective for regional stability and socioeconomic development. So these challenges include energy-related obstacles, such as underdeveloped energy infrastructure, high vulnerability to climate change impacts, very low electrification rates, and very low level of access to clean cooking. And this is in addition to issues of conflicts that the region faces, translating into a rising number of refugees, rising number of internally displaced people. It grew from 1 to 3 million people in the last 3 years, and you may hear what's happening in Burkina Faso and the three borders region, or in Lake Chad surrounding regions, and all the consequences this has on the entire region. So demographic and economic growth and rapid urbanization have been driving energy demand and aspiration for development, and this offers huge opportunities for adopting quickly clean energy systems. So we believe that with the right policy, the right policies and the right investment, countries can really achieve several SDG targets in the coming decade, and this would include reliable and universal access to electricity and to clean cooking devices and fuels for all. This also include a more modern energy mix that would rely on cleaner sources, especially in the power sector. It will also include a lot on energy efficiency in all sectors to fuel an economy that could be more than 2 times bigger than today's, but just with 55% more energy. But there are many challenges to achieving this pathway, and this includes financing issues that have been exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic, and also other issues related to climate risk. So climate change is posing substantial drought and agricultural risk to the region. And well, as we all know, despite contributing very little to emissions at the global level today, Sahel is already facing a lot of the impacts. And this really highlights the importance of intersectorial interdependencies, like the water, energy, food security, and how to integrate approaches that would take into account all those parameters to improve resource efficiency, productivity, and security. So this new IEA report, which is available online for free, you can access all the data and the findings, provides some roadmap for Sahel to overcome some of these challenges and to achieve rapid energy development. What I think can be interesting for you who might not come from the French-speaking Sahel region, but from neighboring regions or other African regions, is that what we show as analysis for this region can be really taken elsewhere. And if Sahel is able to reach those goals, I think that for other regions with, of course, different profiles, but sometimes more strengths and potential in some areas, could be some very exemplary pathway. And basically, our analysis show that Sahel can achieve SDG 7 goals, double the size of its economy with limited growth of CO2 emissions. And this is possible with clean energy transitions. And I'll detail in the coming slides how we do that. So let's first have a snapshot of the region. Sahel is home to 100 million people today, and its economy accounts for 6% of sub-Saharan Africa if we exclude South Africa. The region's GDP has grown annually at a bit less than 5% over the last decade, which is a higher pace than in many other parts of the continent. It's 3 times higher than South Africa. And this also means that it has taken 15 years to double the region's economy. And this has translated, of course, into higher energy demand. The economy and energy development have also led to a rise in CO2 emissions. And the region emitted 25 million tons of CO2 in 2019, which is approximately the same as Paris metropolitan area. So this means that in this region, we have among the lowest levels of emission per capita in the world. So this is today's situation, but what could the future look like by 2030? So the region will be home to 140 million people, which means that we add 20 million new people in cities. And based on current policies and trends, the economy is set to grow, with GDP expanding by around 90%. That would lead to a similar increase in CO2 emissions, but it will still be a very low level if we compare the global in the global scene. And by the end of the decade, we will still have 80 million people without access to electricity and 120 million people without access to clean cooking. And this is what we describe in our steps or stated policy scenario all along the report. But we have made another scenario because we think a brighter future is possible for the region. And this is the Africa case. And in this Africa case scenario, we envision a future where Sahel would achieve SDG 7, meaning that everyone would have access to electricity and cooking. The economy will double in size by 2030, but the growth in emissions is very, very modest. So this scenario is based on the Africa Union 2063 agenda for inclusive economic growth. And it really relies on measures around efficiency, clean power, and access that I will detail in the coming slides. Okay, so let's have a deeper look at what the region looks like in terms of energy and how energy system could evolve. So to make it short, we could say that Sahel is a resource-rich but energy-poor region. So in 2019, primary energy demand stand at almost 1 exajoule, which is the same as one state in the United States of America, which is Nebraska, but Nebraska is 50 times less populated. So this gives you an idea of the fact that the level of energy demand is very low in Sahel if we compare to other regions of the world. But energy demand has been growing very quickly at 4% per year, which means that energy demand has doubled over the past 15 years. Still, the level of infrastructure is very low. If we look at the power sector, there are 35 watts of installed capacity per person, which is 1/3 of the average in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is only 4% of the global average. When we look energy consumption, it stands at 0.2 ton of oil equivalent per capita, which is 10 times below the world average and half of the average in sub-Saharan Africa. Looking more at the energy mix, we can see that it's not very modern, but rather traditional, heavily dominated by traditional use of biomass, while fossil fuel make up the remainder in power, but also in final demand. Electricity comes at 75% from oil, while coal is on the rise. And this power generation mix creates high prices of electricity, with oil being mostly imported. But oil also meets some needs for demand in transport, as transport is making 1/4 of total final consumption. And there are now 1 million passenger cars in the region, 1 million passenger cars, which are all thermic internal combustion engine vehicles. Still, what you can see a bit on this picture is that clean energy technologies are on the rise in the power sector. You might not see it very well because it's very thin, but there is some share of hydro, wind, and solar PV in today's mix, and I will detail that in a second. So this is today's. Where do current policies and current trends lead us? So if we look at our steps scenario, we would see that energy demand would increase by almost 50%. This growth is driven by population increase, by increasing needs in the residential sector for cooking, but also for mobility and transport. And to take an example, the number of passenger cars would triple in the coming 10 years. Still, you can see that the proportion of each energy source in the mix does not radically change from today's picture, as bioenergy and fossil fuel together still satisfy 90% of primary energy demand. The power sector would expand at a pace which is faster than population, which is good news, but that would result in capacity per capita doubling. And we also see more solar PV, wind, and hydro in the mix. But this is not enough to provide electricity for all. And you remember that we have this Africa case scenario, which shapes a pathway towards a different future. So here we see that with only 25% more energy, the economy can more than double, and the mix can modernize. Efficiency is at the heart of all end-use sectors, for example, with more efficient cars, devices, and appliances. And you can see that the share of modern renewables is also expanding a lot, as well as natural gas. So now I will detail a bit the SDG 7 targets one by one. So starting with SDG 7.1 about access to electricity and clean cooking. This is the picture today in terms of where the region stands. And as you would know, access to energy has been and remains really at the center of all Sahelian energy policies. This is really the number one topic that came when discussing with regional policymakers. And let's look how the region has evolved and how it can expand in terms of energy access. So today in 2019, only 1/3 of Sahelians have access to electricity and less than 10% to modern and clean cooking fuel. This situation has even worsened by the COVID pandemic and its aftermath. However, the region is starting from a very low point, as you can see with the numbers for the year 2000, and progress has been made. But the issue is that the pace of progress was not always enough to satisfy growing population, and there are also big discrepancies across countries. So around 1 million people gained access to electricity in the region, and electrification rates grew everywhere with very impressive improvements in recent years in Mali, for example. Mali, along with Senegal and Mauritania, have more than half of its population connected to electricity. Still, a number of challenges remain, including, like in many other African countries, challenges for the utilities and their financial health and their capacities. We can also see that despite grid extension and fast expansion of off-grid solutions such as solar home system and mini grids, the regional electrification rate is still at 32%, while the average for sub-Saharan Africa is at 50%. The picture for cooking, which is in orange, is not as good and as well evolving, has little to no progress has been made in recent years. There have been policy implemented, for example, in Mauritania with LPG support policies, but progress have really hardly outpaced population growth, and the traditional use of biomass for cooking needs largely remains prevalent. As we all know, this has consequences for the environment, for climate, for health, for gender equity as well. So where do current policies would lead us? According to our projections, the region will fall short of the global goal of universal access, and there will be 80 million people without electricity, mostly in Chad, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and 120 million people without clean cooking. But again, this future is not set in stone, and what our Africa case envisions is universal access, which requires to connect 8.5 million people every year until 2030. And according to geospatial analysis we've conducted, looking at where population live, how far they are from the grid, how far they are from road and infrastructures, our least cost pathway analysis shows that we need a combination of technologies to connect and to bring electricity to all. Grid extension would connect almost half of those who need electricity, but you can see that mini grid can also contribute, as well as standalone systems like solar home systems. They would be very prevalent in Burkina Faso, for example. And reaching universal access to clean cooking also requires to strongly step up policies and to also rely on a combination of solutions, improve biomass cook stoves in rural areas, along with biodigesters, and in urban centers, we expect LPG, but also electricity, to be the most convenient and economical solutions to provide access. So in terms of recommendation for government, we mentioned a few ones, including supporting the construction of infrastructure required, for example, for LPG distribution and for grid extension, developing programs to roll out technologies such as solar home system that would ensure reliable, affordable supply for those who would gain access. And we also draw the attention of policymakers on the need to bring consistent support in vulnerable regions, for example, where there are conflicts and uncertainty. It's important for policies to remain stable on the ground and not to make some LPG supply disruption, for example. So this was on SDG 7.1 access. Let's now move to the question of modern renewables in the mix of the country. So the share of modern renewables in total final consumption stands below 2%, but there's been improvement since over the past two decades. As you understood, today the mix is really dominated by biomass and fossil fuels. So modern renewables still play a limited role. Here, I propose that we look at power generation and see how modern renewables have taken more role in this picture. So if we look at power generation, we'll see that electricity supply has quadrupled since 2000, and this growth was accompanied by a slight rise of the share of clean power sources. So today, the power mix is dominated by oil. It's often under the form of heavy fuel oil, but we also have an important share of renewables contributing to electricity generated. Renewables make 20% of generation, but there are strong regional, national disparities. Mali has hydropower contributing to 40% of its electricity, and power dams in Mali also provide electricity to neighbors. Wind has very fastly grown in Mauritania, and more recently, the largest farm in West Africa, located in Senegal, with more than 150 megawatts, was launched. Solar generation has doubled every year since 2015. So there are projects everywhere. There are very large plants in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Senegal. Still, we can, so this is good news. Solar generation capacity doubling every year. Still, the level is still a bit low, and it's 40 times lower than what is installed in the Netherlands. We all agree, I think, that Sahel is way bigger and way more sunny than the Netherlands are, but today there are 40 times more installed capacity of solar PV in the Netherlands than in Sahel. So what could the future look like? We envision that power sector power system will expand and generation would triple by the end of the decade. So it means that 7 gigawatts of new capacity would be added, and there is a shift to a more diversified and low carbon mix. You can see there is more room for hydro, gas, wind, but also solar. So oil is no more the king of this electricity mix in the region. We also have coal expanding with one project in Niger, which is under construction. But in Niger, we also have more solar. The country recently launched the Scaling Solar IFC initiative. And we see that for the entire region, solar PV capacity would develop fast, and modern renewables would make almost 45% of the mix. When we look at our Africa case, it's a more ambitious pathway where there is 4 times more electricity generated and 24 gigawatts of capacity added. 20 gigawatts of capacity added, so from 3 gigawatts today. Modern renewables would make a really higher contribution to the mix than in the steppes, with 20 terawatt hour of electricity coming from solar, wind, and hydro combined. Solar PV on its own would reach 8 gigawatts of installed capacity. So this is closer to what the Netherlands have today, but still not as much as what the Netherlands have today. We also see strong development for gas, which would expand to absorb variable renewables, and coal. Coal would run with lower capacity factors, but in this scenario, we still keep the Salka Damda project, which is under construction in Niger. So this new generation in the Africa case requires investment to step up, and the requirement per year would be around 3 billion USD. It's more than twice than what we expect in the steppes scenario. But when you look at the power sector investments globally and in Africa, it's not that much. And that would really help, along with improvement of the reliability of power system. This would be a key element to bring electricity to all Sahelians. Okay, one other topic I want to present to you is around efficiency. As you know, it's the number 3 target under SDG 7, and we think that energy efficiency will be central to achieve clean energy transition pathway in the Sahel. Energy efficiency is a resource that everyone has and everyone can rely on. So a way of looking at energy efficiency is looking at the energy intensity indicator. So this is defined as energy inputs to GDP. And in that terms, we can see that energy intensity in Sahel is relatively low and compared to the average in sub-Saharan Africa and to non-OECD countries. But improvements of this energy intensity have been slower in Sahel than elsewhere. And this pace is really comparing unfavorably to other regions. Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole is making progress 3 times faster than Sahel in terms of improving the energy intensity. And this is what you can see here on this chart. There is around 0.5% improvement of the annual energy intensity. Under current policies, we see that energy intensity drops and improvements are above 2% per year. But in the Africa case, it would be above 4% per year. And this means that by 2030, Sahel could be using 15% less energy to power its energy system and to fuel its energy system. So 15% less energy, but a more developed modern energy system, and 15% more economic activity and GDP. So this level of improvement is possible, and it's really consistent with transformation we have observed in the past in other economies like India and China when they saw their rapid modernization. So the Africa case and our recommendation really look at all the sectors. And if I just take one example of the transport sector, we can see that, so we expect more energy demand in transport because there will be more people and more cars in the road. We would move from 1 million passenger cars today to 3 in our step scenario by the end of the decade. And this would translate into a rise in oil products, gasoline mostly, used to move all those cars. But again, if we look at how this could evolve, in our Africa case scenario, as the economy is as bigger, as we have a more economic dynamism, we have more activity, we have more cars on the road, and this could lead to an increase in demand for oil products. But on the other hand, we have efficiency measures. So, for example, standards to reduce, to ensure that the least performing cars are out of the market, and that on average the fleet of car is consuming less oil as we move ahead. So these are strong measures. Plus, we see a rising electrification, mostly for 2- and 3-wheelers, that can offset the increase in demand for oil products. So this is one illustration that can be brought to all sectors. Standards for appliances in the buildings, standards for building codes, appliances also for cooling, which will be an important need, as well as more efficient motors in the industry. Okay, we also discussed in this report the supply side of the energy system, because as you may know, there are very interesting perspectives for oil and gas, and there are hydrocarbon resources available in the region. So if you look here on the left, this is the total oil supply in West Africa, excluding Nigeria. So you will see that Chad has been already a very important producer of crude oil. Mauritania also started at the beginning of the century, and Niger also has some contribution. Other countries, including Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, are also producing. But what we observe looking, or what we expect looking in the coming 6 years, is that Senegal would be joining this group of West African oil-producing countries, given the recent discoveries that were made in Senegal. Same for Mauritania. And this is just a picture for oil, but there are also strong gas resources shared between Senegal and Mauritania, which are offshore. And this brings perspective. So we expect that global demand, there will be global demand for this new supply in the near term. But we also point out that there are risks with new oil and gas resources development, and countries should take into account a number of considerations. The first of them is not to rely only on future revenues from oil and gas to fuel the economic development of the country, because market dynamics can evolve very fast, very quickly, prices can evolve very quickly, and there are many lessons to be learned from countries who heavily rely on their resources and exports and revenues as a way to power their development. But what we clearly see is that there is room for developing those resources, but in a careful, well-managed, and very efficient way, even if the world is increasingly considering decarbonization and reduction in oil and gas consumption. One topic we also explored in the report is that minerals can bring new opportunities everywhere. So today, the region of Sahel holds important reserves of metals, including gold, but also of minerals which are critical for clean energy technologies and for which we expect the demand to rise and to rise even faster as globally the world is heading towards a net zero energy system and to a decarbonization pathway. So for example, the world will increasingly need copper for electric systems and grids, zinc for wind power, titanium and manganese, and countries in the region have some resources that they are already exploiting. Burkina Faso is producing zinc, Senegal titanium and manganese, etc. So those Sahelian countries are not major producers today, but there could be potential. And if geological exploration survey and campaigns could be done, and if new resources were to be discovered, this could bring sustainable opportunities for exports and for revenues. Of course, there are many questions on how to manage sustainably mining activities, and there are a lot of parameters to take into consideration, including environment and social consequences of those activities, as well as governance and transparency around the management of the revenues. So taking one example on copper, this is how on the left part the copper supply has evolved over the past decade. So you see it's growing, and we expect in our global scenario that the global demand will increase. Today, Mauritania is making a significant contribution to copper production, so there will be room for increasing the exports. Okay, the last area we explored in the report was the needs for investment, because we know that there are today new international climate finance promises that will be required to make this bright future happen. So the region's energy future is not predetermined. Sahel countries will be able to decide their own trajectory for energy transition, and our Africa case lays out a path on how the region could get multiple development benefits and reach energy goals. But to get there, we need increasing energy investment. And again, we know that as of today, with the 100 billion that the international community had promised at COP21, and that so far have not been reached, there is need for building trust again within the international community, and donors and international community has a moral responsibility to increase investment flow in Africa. So more funds are needed, but also a mix of tools, including private, public sources of finance, with all the possible instruments that would bring the favorable framework for more investment. Where to invest? Infrastructure must come first, because reliable electricity, grids, transportation infrastructure are needed to really develop the industry, to bring power and opportunities to rural communities, and also potentially to access mineral wealth in the region. So to have those investments coming, supportive policies are needed. So countries can really take measures to de-risk investment, to ensure that skills and capacities are there, and to support some nascent industries. And there are opportunities for jobs and for local employment and industries in those countries. We need clear policies as well that connect the sustainable development goals for access, efficiency, and power together. And with those strong policy signals, governments would be able to tap into finance and funds which are available under climate finance labels. So this is a key opportunity. And again, those policies of development will bring many co-benefits and help governments, I think, to reach their primary objectives, which is offering jobs to a young and dynamic population, developing skills and a well-trained workforce, reducing inequity and reducing vulnerability to climate change. With in the region is has impacts that we can already observe and which will be higher than in other parts of the world. So that's all for the presentation and the main findings of the report. The report is not very long. It's 150 pages, contains a lot of figures, data. So you can get all that online for free. And I will stop and look if you had some questions so far. Okay, so I see there are some questions on the Q&A functionality and also people who raise their hand. I will start with the written questions and please continue to write them, but I will also give the floor to those who raise hand so that they can speak up. So one first question we have from Miss Jacqueline is, what are the major sources of bioenergy contributing to the STEPS scenario and the other Africa case scenario, and what makes a significant difference between the two scenarios? So let me come back to the to that slide. Up. Okay, here we are. So this is today's energy mix, and when we refer to bioenergy, this is usually made of solid, it's traditional use of biomass more than modern biomass. Concretely, it's wood stick and firewood that is used for cooking, but also sometimes for small scale business or very small scale aircraft or industrial processes. So it's firewood. It's also charcoal, which is a secondary product of firewood. It can be waste, dung, and other similar products. It's not easy to have real data on that, but we have developed some tool to help estimate consumption of those solid biofuels. And I invite you to watch again the previous webinars we had. So there's been one with UN FIO, which are very expert on that, and two that were conducted in September. You can watch them in the YouTube playlist of IEA University, where we detail the model we developed and which is available to everyone and could help quantify better the bioenergy consumption. To answer the second part of the question, we expect in the STEPS scenario the use of bioenergy to continue because there will be more people from 100 million to 140, so more cooking needs, and there will not be much done in terms of providing efficient cook stoves. But in the Africa case, we managed to reduce the share of bioenergy because all people have access to clean and modern equipments for cooking. So this means that some people who today were relying on charcoal in cities, for example, would shift to LPG or to electricity. Some people who in rural areas are relying on firewood, just used with 3 fire stones, would be able to use improved biomass cook stove, so which reduces the need for fuel, or to use biodigesters. So these are the measures behind. I hope this answers your question, Ms. Jacqueline. There is one question which relates to densification of the grid. I'll come back to that. Okay, so when we look at what are the different means to bring access to electricity to all, we usually make the below categorization. So there is off-grid and on-grid. When it comes to off-grid, we have mini grids, which can rely on different technologies, solar PV, but also micro hydro, micro wind. It can be hybrid with batteries or with diesel generator. Then you have standalone systems, which are mostly PV. And when it comes to the grid, we usually consider that the grid can be extended. So new lines to regions that today don't have any grid infrastructure, but grid can also be densified. So in regions where there are high voltage or medium voltage lines, you sometimes have people who live under the grid but don't have access to electricity. So it's a question of either developing the low voltage lines for communities which are living close to where the grid infrastructure is already, or sometimes it's also more about affordability and prices, or business models, if I may say, policies to bring access to electricity to people who live in places where the grid is, but for a number of reasons they don't benefit from it. So to Yanda, I hope this answers your question. I just confirmed that the all these monthly webinars, we record them on and we make the video available on YouTube. So there is if you type YouTube IEA Africa University, you will access all of them. And we put all the presentations online too when you look at the comment under the YouTube video channel. Okay, I'd like now to give the floor to people who raise their hand. So starting with Dr. Obinda Gerson.
Hello, Arnold. Thank you for your presentation.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Obinda Gerson from Covenant University. I have two questions. One, the first has to do with your expectation in the Africa case. I'm wondering, did you consider the cost and affordability of the clean energy appliances in relation to the income level of the consumers in the Sahel region? That's the first question I have. And then the second one relates to the forecast of production from petroleum, especially in Senegal, where you're expecting that there'll be increased consumption of petroleum products in transportation and different sectors, while at the same time you've assumed a transition to cleaner fuels and the use of cleaner, more energy efficient appliances. So if you look at both assumptions, they seem to be contradictory, especially because you have the same energy companies, for instance, previously run oil and gas companies are becoming energy companies. And so they are going the way of the clean energy. And so I wonder if you considered both assumptions, both realities rather, in making that assumption that there will be increased use of internal combustion cars, there will be increased use of petroleum products, while at the same time, you're also assuming that there will be a transition to cleaner energy technologies and more efficient energy appliances.
Thank you, Dr. Obinda. These are excellent questions. We could spend hours discussing around those questions, but I'll try to bring some elements very quickly. So on your first question, do we consider affordability and how people can actually purchase the efficient appliances, the more efficient cars, the all those new equipments.
Yes.
So our model is not looking at these economical points, which is something we are often trying to improve and to document. The way we put it is that from the policy making side or from the supply side, if we want to bring electricity to all, if we want to limit the growth in electricity demand, that number of appliances, of standalone systems in rural areas are needed, and the related cost would be that much. Then when we say cost, it can be investment on the shoulders of the states themselves, but also with development finance and foreign support. There is also some costs which are on the users themselves, and here, depending on what you look, for people who are already connected to the grid and who acquire and purchase energy efficient appliances, it's an investment, but with a return on investment, because their electricity bills would decrease if their appliances are consuming less. Then when it comes to people who are really at the bottom of wealth and incomes below poverty lines, we've not addressed really the issue of what can be done to make sure that people have financial means to invest in solar home system, but we have listed good practices we've seen here and there on how to make more affordable some solutions, how to. One thing we can all think of is how to break the investment wall, when instead of paying upfront a very important cost, you can pay as you go and work with regular installments rather than a big upfront investment. So these are topics we are looking at, but not yet central to the analysis. And the scenario where everyone gets access assumes that we put all the required financial means to make that happen. And the mix we are presenting between grid, mini grid, and standalone is the least cost option of them all, meaning that it would be even more expensive to bring the grid to every region, including rural settlements. So does that answer your first question?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, it does.
Great. Okay. And on the second one, which is very, very interesting, so trying to take some different ideas you mentioned, looking upstream at the oil and gas production. So, and as you very correctly pointed out, there are energy companies which used to be pure players of oil and gas and who are transitioning into more energy companies, looking at power, looking at services and efficiency, etc. And this is something we observe at a global level. Indeed, because at the global level, in all our scenario, we anticipate demand for oil to stop growing and to plateau and then decrease. So those companies are preparing this transition. And in the case of Senegal, where important discoveries were made, what we observe is that we think there is room for these new barrels of oils to meet some demand globally. We just warn that there will be increasing competition between different oil producer countries, and that governments need to be efficient in developing those resources and need to be careful in how they manage the wealth and revenues coming from them. So this was more on the upstream producer country part of your question. Looking more at what you referred as maybe the contradictory assumptions on the scenario, let me maybe come back to the slide on transport. Okay, here on the right part of the slide. So indeed, in our Africa case, we expect more GDP growth, more mobility. There would be 500,000 more cars on the roads of Sahel, because we made this scenario as something which is more ambitious economically, and this shall naturally lead to more energy demand. And this is where energy efficiency is playing its role. And this is a question of upward trends, more activity, more development, so more energy needs, but downward effect with more efficient appliances. And in the case of transport, it's a question of making sure that the standards on second-handed cars, which are imported from Asia, from Europe, meet a certain level of performance and standards. It's about looking at the oil products which come from refineries in the region or which are imported, and to ensure that they have some higher performances too. So there's a lot of measures to try to offset the growth of service demand. But last point that we also mentioned in the report is that the Sahel is has been so limitedly or little developed in terms of energy demand, and then in terms of subsequent CO2 emissions, that there is a need for expanding energy services. There is a need to modernize energy systems, and we draw a pathway where the additional emissions are modest, because but there are additional emissions indeed, so there will be more CO2 under this development, but we believe that the co-benefits are definitely worth it, and that the region is still a very small emitter. So this trajectory of growing activity and some emissions that we try to limit as much but still are growing is something very legitimate. I don't know if that answers the second one.
Thank you, Arnaud. Yeah.
Okay, I'm saying we're running out of time, but there was also someone else raising a hand. I'd like to give you the floor, Leham Mudenda. Okay, I don't know if that was a hand raised on purpose or not. If not, I'd just like to thank all of you for your attention. So again, looking on YouTube, IEA Africa University, you can access all the material, and we are at your disposal for any further explanation or information. Okay, I think we won't hear from Lehan Mudenda. So I wish you a very good day, and thank you for your attention today. Bye bye.